Hey, Les, when did you know that, when did it become apparent to you that Lance was going to make this team, this initial 53-man roster?
Well, it's all y'all been tweeting about since his first catch of the preseason. So I think you know what, it's probably I can tell you this with Lance. You remember, and you weren't here, Sarah, during OTAs, that we probably did some moderated version of walkthroughs with our contributors, probably the guys that didn't dress in the preseason, and we did some competitive drills with our younger, less experienced group, and Lance started making plays during those periods, some of the only live periods that we were doing in OTA. So his march to make our team probably began there, continued into the preseason games, and we felt like all that he had shown, that he was definitely worthy of making our 53.
Then just one more. I'm sure every year you'll take having the last spot on the waiver wire, but does that change anything how you handle the next week or so between now this initial roster and then week one?
Yeah, it does change. Yes, the answer is yes. I would sign up that for right now if we can. If the devil's on the Zoom call, we can make a deal and have a waiver claim of 32 every year. But I think it probably doesn't necessarily change a lot, because even when you're picking 26 or 25 and you're trying to fill a need or avoid via a waiver claim, you're always somewhat concerned that you could be picking a little bit later in that lottery.
Stu?
Les, were there any guys that you were surprised by, maybe as far as what they showed on teams that kind of helped their cause with filling those last few spots on the roster?
I think from a special team standpoint, it is always interesting which of the younger players, the rookies in particular, are going to step up, because a lot of them hadn't played special teams in a while. A lot of times they may play special teams as a freshman, but maybe sophomore, junior, even senior year, because they're contributing on offense or defense. It's just been a while. And it's also neat to see players like, I'll just give an example, like Terrell Burgess, who last year was inactive some because of, not necessarily being a stalwart on teams, but let's call it applying some lessons from 2021 and into this year, and now is someone that Joe DeCamillis definitely wants on teams. So every year that dynamic is very important, right? Because you're dressing, you may have a role on defense or offense, you might be insurance on offense or defense, but if you're a core four, you're playing 20, 25, 30 plays, on that side of the ball.
Thank you.
All right, Stu.
Jordan?
Hey, Les, nice. Is that Carl Sagan behind you? Cosmos?
Wow. Yes, I'm in chapter 12 right now. So
long way to go.
I recommend everyone to read Carl, especially as you go down to make your final cuts. Definitely helpful, especially chapter 10.
Les,
it's physics. Special teams is physics, Stu. You know what I mean? It's less geometry and more physics.
Right. Les, wondered if you could take us through the decision-making process in rostering all three quarterbacks, understanding there's some nuance as well with the way that you guys operate during the week itself and not just on game day.
Well, it's I think when you look at three quarterbacks, it's been something, and I'm not sure how many teams keep three now, whether it's 50% less than 50% or a little more. But what we're always trying to do is, like, who are the 48 men? And then really 49 through 53, they're inactive on game day. So it really doesn't matter what position they play. And there's, like, this year we're keeping 6 corners on the 53. So we go into the 53 and not necessarily having this cookie cutter of number at positions. It's really, like, who do we think are the best players? And then who do we think, like in Lance's case, who do we think that we need to keep, right, to protect him from maybe getting claimed? Who do we think we might could slide through, be a part of the 54 through 69? Because now with with having 2 flexes a week and each player getting 3, hopefully we're past COVID. But obviously over the last few years, those guys that are 54 through 69 are very important and play a lot. So that's the big picture thought of being able to keep our best 53 players. And probably this year, there was probably like 4 players, counting Big Bobby with a suspension, Logan with, 3 players with Logan, T. Howard, and Mr. Lake with, that we were able to slide through with the cut down, unfortunately because of injury, but it probably gave us 4 spots that made our roster a little bit more flexible this year. The cuts would have been a little bit tougher had those 4 players, been healthy and ready to play immediately.
And then, excuse me, then with the college free agent class, 3 college free agents making this roster in Jake Hummel, and Lance, and Kier. And so wondering if you could take us through what that process was, identifying those guys, and then what they show you as a group through the season that means they have a spot here.
Yeah, it's what's neat about that process is we do try to sometime in April pod what we would call our priority players who at that point in time are college free agents. So as an example, there's a few players that we drafted, and then I'm not saying Lance wasn't one of these, but there's a few players that we drafted that started in that pod. I think Rush Yeast was, and I think Akiri was at Michigan State that they began in that pod. So our personnel staff, our coaches sit down, work together, and really try to prioritize. And they're going to kind of own that process after the draft. But every now and then we'll add some of those players to our draft board for later picks. So that's the process. And then once the players get here, then it's a competition to see who can help. And I know Jake's someone who's right now. Mr. Hummel is someone who's going to be right on our 48-man roster. Lance is someone who probably will not be on the 48-man roster, but definitely made our 53. So, and who was give me the third?
Kier Thomas.
Kier Thomas is someone who, going back to Lance's partner from Montana State, what we will end up doing with him today, Daniel Hardy, is we'll end up putting him on an IR to return type situation. So Kier is a player who has a chance to be active on game day. So all 3 of those players carved out a role, whether it was Hummel on special teams, whether it was Kier as a 4th OLB, and whether it was Lance as somewhat of a redshirt future prospect.
Thanks, Les.
Gary.
Hey, Gary.
Hey, Les. What went into the decisions to waive Jacob Harris and Chris Garrett?
I think probably at the end of the day, Lance McCutcheon had a big part in maybe knocking Jacob off the roster, and in terms of just having a better preseason at wide receiver. Interestingly, we'll definitely try to get Jacob back. And he's definitely someone who, speaking of special teams, Joe DeCamillis would activate on game day and play all 4. So I think that's the reason for that. Who was your second one?
Chris Garrett.
Oh yeah, Chris. I mean, unfortunately for Chris, he was, he had that middle part of camp where he wasn't able to play due to injury, and just through the course of preseason, Kier Thomas was someone that what we felt played overall just a more complete football game, even though Chris is someone with some physics, some juice in his body to affect the passer, but not quite there yet. And I think missing some of that training camp probably didn't give him a chance to come totally around. But that was that reason, Gary.
Thank you.
Gilbert.
Hey, Les. Going back to Bryce Perkins, what did you see from him as a pocket passer? Did you see improvements in the area?
You know what? You definitely probably. It's interesting. I would say the answer would be yes, but I think we've always, probably from day one to now, he's definitely improved as a pocket passer. But he has been someone who has a feel in the pocket, and I do think that's one of the reasons he becomes a little bit of a weapon running the football, because a lot of times you'll see when he does run it, he starts from the pocket, and there's an element where the defense is having to cover a pocket passer, and then there's a lane where he has a chance to hit a lane either between the A, B, C, or D gaps and go from there. So he's always been obviously the weapon, the edge, superpower, being able to make plays with your feet. Sometimes let's call it overshadow the ability to pass from the pocket. But I do think his natural feel back there gives him that that weapon of running with the ball a little bit more. He was probably a little sharper weapon because of that, and not someone who just immediately takes off.
And Les, I know you're not caught up on the numbers for position, but why did you go with 8 instead of 9 at offensive line?
We felt like at the end of the day, the 8 that we kept have all played or started with us, and the other 3, we'll try to get some players back to practice squad, and we felt like we could slide those players right through waivers and get them back to the practice squad versus keeping them on the 53. So this time of year is probably that one time a year, right, where 31 teams or 32 counting us are sitting there really, really monitoring the waiver wire, and really over the next 24, 48, 72 hours, right, people have been planning to maybe attack the waiver. Then once everyone starts getting into the season, it gets a little bit easier, less complicated to slide people, on and off your roster, because, people at that point are focused on the next opponent. So there is a strategy to, who you keep, who do you try to slide through this time of year.
Thank you, Les.
Fred. Lost. Maria.
Hey, Les, kind of to expand on that, what are your next 48 hours sort of like for you as all the wires go and it gets a little crazy?
Well, we definitely monitor the wire. I think the preparation for the wires, been done. Our pro scouting staff have really been, I would say this, really watching specific players over the last 3 games during the preseason. There will be an element of also weighing in. Let's call it, if you're a rookie who gets cut, where do we value you coming out? Were you someone that was, in a good position on our draft board? What we call it, I call it surprise cuts, but players that we didn't really monitor in the preseason, but do come free this time of year. A lot of times those players have a lot of play time in the past in real games. So we will take a step back like every team and try to one of those players to our roster, to our 53 or whole pat. Probably doesn't affect our 48 much because our 48 really to go into this game against the Bills, it's probably more important to really know what we're doing.
Right.
Then maybe be a little bit subjectively better physically, but maybe slower on the field that day if you don't know what to do. So that's what we'll do, like every other team. But it's interesting over the last few years, based on going back to I think we mentioned the Tier 4 committee. We call it that our CFA committee. Tier 4 is just our buzzword for it. But because of the collaboration between scouting and coaching, there is an element where there's a lot of buy-in with players when we bring them in, and and that leads to really wanting to develop and somewhat see the movie through. So we've probably been a little less active over the last few years at this point in time than in the past.
Thank you.
Stu.
Well, I said at tight end, you've got Higbee and, of course, Bryson Hopkins. I guess why two tight ends, and what has, Bryson especially shown you in terms of progress and development that made you comfortable putting him in that second tight end role?
Well, I think starting probably starting with his practice, as a scout teamer, look team when we went to the playoffs, and his job was to give a really good Zach Ertz look, give a really good Gronkowski look, give a really good Kittle look, and then that actually parlayed into an appearance in the Super Bowl. So I think he's continued that evolution and the confidence he gained from those 4 to 6 weeks in the playoffs and Super Bowl continued into the preseason. So give him credit. You like to see that because I know I've mentioned his story to a few people along the way, because let's call it the first 2 years when you're not dressing more than you're dressing, and you've been the leading receiver at Purdue your senior year, that those aren't easy days. And if you're a father or a mother and your kid was going through that, boy, you'd want to just give him a hug. But he fought through it, and he applied some lessons and learned and earned the spot. And at the end, and again, we'll try to bring some players back to practice squad, but because we're 11 personnel dominant team, because there's some of the 13T, we called it last year, where you train some OL to do some tight end. We did feel like going with two were going to be on the 48-man roster, so it was better to keep 2 at this point in time on the 53.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
We'll wrap up with you, Jordan.
Hey, Les, don't want to put you on the spot at all, but we asked Sean this during training camp. So,
well, hey, Jordan, if you don't want to put me on the spot, you can choose not to.
I'll push through it, but just wanted to see where you're at in terms of your contract extension, if you're able to shed any light on that process with us at all.
I'll keep that in-house. That's something that's, we'll handle internally. But looking forward to 2022. It's been an awesome journey with the Rams starting in 2012, and definitely expect that to continue, not just in the near term, but the long term.